The Nidai Kitetsu is a sword that was introduced early in the Wano arc, and has been in Zoro's presence multiple times, yet he still hasn't gotten the opportunity to wield it, almost as if Oda is kinda trolling him. Like the way Zoro sensed the sword's presence, he noticed right away it was a famous sword, but Luffy still wouldn't give it to him. He then noticed the sword's presence again when it was being returned to Hitetsu, identifying the blade as one of the Kitetsu. So I believe it's a pretty common opinion in the One Piece community that this sword's new master will eventually be Roronoa Zoro. But the execution of how it happens is equally as important to me. What is going on, everybody? Jagan here, and today I'm here to discuss with you how Zoro will obtain the cursed blade Nidai Kitetsu and what significance this will have for him, as well as give my thoughts on how he acquired Enma and how I think acquiring the Nidai Kitetsu will be a lot different from that. So to start things off, I think it's important to give a quick overview on the current sword hierarchy and rankings on blades in One Piece. I'm going to be using the English names for this just because they're a little bit easier for me to pronounce. So at the very top, we got the 12 supreme graded blades. 3 of these blades are known, one of them being Yoru, Dracula Mihawk's sword, the other being Shodai Kitetsu, which is the final form of the cursed blade Kitetsu swords, and the current whereabouts for this are unknown. The last of which actually being a Basento and not a katana, and that is Whitebeard's blade, Murakumo Giri. Next up you have the 21 great graded blades, and 5 of these are known, which include Zoro's swords Wado Ichimoji and Enma. After that you got the 50 skillful grade blades, only 3 of those are known, which include Zoro's former sword Yubashiri. And lastly we have the regular graded blades, which don't have a number count, and only 2 of those in the world are currently known, one of which includes Zoro's sword, the Sandai Kitetsu. And the Kitetsu specifically are a trio of blades crafted from the Kitetsu school of swordsmiths in Wano. All 3 of these blades are cursed. They are said to eventually be the downfall of the wielder, and because of this, nobody has really used the Kitetsu swords in recent time. Back in Logtown, the shop owner was even paranoid to sell this Sandai Kitetsu in fear of something happening to the wielder, therefore coming back to haunt him, the seller. But in some cases, a person's luck can overcome the blade's curse, like Roronoa Zoro did, which resulted in him obtaining the blade for free. Each of the 3 are different grade and crafted from a different generation of blacksmith. Shodai Kitetsu, which is one of the Supreme 12, and whereabouts are unknown, Nidai Kitetsu, one of the 21 great graded blades, is currently in the possession of Hitetsu in Wano Kuni, and of course Sandai Kitetsu, which I just elaborated on, is in the possession of Zoro and is only a regular grade blade. So in my opinion, when it comes to how he's actually going to obtain the Nidai Kitetsu, I see it being in a situation where he's forced to prove himself worthy or accomplish something great which results in Hitetsu giving him the blade. Acquiring Nidai Kitetsu to me is going to be different than how he got Enma. Enma to me was a very unique circumstance. Zoro didn't really have to earn Enma. He did tame this blade, of course, which is an incredible feat in and of itself, but he didn't have to do anything new to earn the right to possess it. Zoro outright exchanged Shusui for Enma, which for Zoro to do that required an extremely rare circumstance. Other times in the series when Zoro has gotten new swords such as Logtown and Thriller Bark, it's always been a result of his previous swords breaking, so he was forced to find a replacement. And I think that's going to be the case for when he gets Nidai. I think he will lose one of his current swords, which I'll elaborate on later in the video. But he's not usually the type to just flat out exchange his swords when he's already fully equipped. This was a rare circumstance where there was a great reason for him to do so. Zoro understood how much Shusui meant to the citizens of Wano Kuni, how important the sword of Ryuma is, a man who is known as the god of blade throughout the land. Gyakumaru emphasizes the connection between Wano's misfortunes and the disappearance of Shusui. That Shusui is an emotional pillar for this country, and returning it could be crucial for the morale of the citizens. There's also a second reason I believe might have been a factor in this decision, although it's not quite as concrete. So during his first conversation with Gyakumaru, the concept of black blades is brought up. Gyakumaru emphasizes the significance of Shusui being a black blade that Ryuma forged through a history of battle. This is something that intrigues Zoro, something he's been wondering about. This makes it pretty clear to me that Mihawk didn't really fully explain the concept of black blades to him during the training. Maybe it's something he wanted him to discover on his own. But obviously, we are interrupted before Gyakumaru can elaborate. but it begs the question to me if maybe Zoro started to realize that forging a black blade is a big deal. Maybe he realized that the one who forged the black blade itself should be the only one to wield the sword. Zoro did continue to pursue Shusui after this initial conflict, yes, but it just makes me wonder if he knew in the back of his mind that creating your own legacy with your blade is a crucial part in building your legacy as a master swordsman. Therefore, better for his own path to let Shusui rest. So I definitely think it's possible that this partly influenced his decision as well. What's also important here is to point out the fact that Shusui and Enma are two blades of the same exact grade, a basically equivalent exchange when it comes to power as of right now. A common misconception is that Enma is actually a direct power-up, and that's technically not true. Enma is what I would consider a conditional power-up. All swords have their tendencies and quirks. Nidai Kitetsu is disobedient and sometimes cut what it wanted to. Yubashiri was light and swift, but lacked power. Shusui was heavy and difficult to master, and would sometimes absorb the slashes of Zoro's other swords. And Enma exudes the wielder's ryo on its own, more than what is needed. So yes, Enma is a blade that basically forces Zoro to use excess ryo, and he's now stronger because of this. Enma essentially acted as a training mechanism for him to get used to that level of output, but it's not like Enma itself holds an advantage in combat over another sword in the 21 great graded blades. It's just the fact that Enma helped Zoro get acquainted to using this excess amount of haki. So if current Zoro went into combat with any other 21 great graded sword instead of Enma, the difference in power output would not be that much. In fact, it'd be nearly identical in my opinion. So Enma as of right now cannot be considered a power-up, but it can be considered a conditional power-up. It can potentially become a power-up because Hitetsu suggested the possibility of accomplishing what Odin could not do, and that is to forge Enma to become a black blade, therefore increasing the rank of the sword and making it stronger. So it's very clear to me that Enma was a unique circumstance. Oda for the first time implemented a strong narrative reason into his sword exchange with Zoro, as well as making the blades in exchange between two swords of the exact same grade, which is obviously very different than Logtown, when after losing two swords that were not even ranked in the Mihawk fight, he replaced them with Nidai Kitetsu, a fine grade, and Yubashiri, a skillful grade. And then of course on Thriller Bark, when he replaced Yubashiri after getting rusted with Shusui, one of the 21 great grades, so it was one level higher than Yubashiri. So looking at the potential of Nidai Kitetsu, it would be Zoro's craziest power-up yet to date, being 2 full tiers stronger than the Nidai Kitetsu. It is literally 2 levels higher than its predecessor. And the reason I say Nidai is the odd man out in this situation is firstly because, like I just mentioned, it's by far his weakest sword. He's due for an upgrade. To become the world's strongest swordsman, I think all of his swords need to be well respected and a high grade. And then secondly, it's because Nidai is literally the predecessor of the sword he's likely going to obtain. I can't see him having 2 Kitetsus in his arsenal, especially because one is just the inferior version of the other. We all know Wado Ichimonji is off limits. Of course, being the sword that inherits Kuina's will, it's the embodiment of the dream he shares with her. And Enma to me has way too much significance in the Wano arc. It has way too many connections, with the possibility even suggested by Hitetsu that Zoro could forge it black. So why would he replace Enma after just getting it? I also don't think getting Shusui back is very likely either because of what I just said about the black blade. I think it's better to just let the sword rest and create your own legacy. So the scenario that I envision in which Zoro obtains the Nidai Kitetsu is one that's actually very similar to what Zoro did on Thriller Bark with Shusui. Thriller Bark being an arc that has actually a lot of similarities to Wano. It also is the arc that first mentions Ryuma's legacy of cutting down a flying dragon, as well as the first mention of Kaido and Wano as a whole. I'm not going to fully expand on these similarities because that would require a whole separate video in of itself, but if you're interested, check out my guy Flame's thread about it on Twitter. The link will be in the description below. So at the end of Eni's lobby, Zoro actually runs into a marine named Shu, who had a devil fruit capable of rusting Yubashiri, leaving him with only 2 swords on Thriller Bark, to which he of course ran into Ryuma's corpse occupied by Brook's shadow. So per usual, Zoro fights and defeats the swordsman of the antagonistic force. This battle being with Ryuma, he basically wins the right to wield the sword. He earns the power-up by defeating him. Then of course after this, Zoro joins the final battle against Oars, in which he makes use of his new sword abilities and has to get used to it. So the strongest opposing swordsman that Wano has is Kin the Wildfire. And I already made an entire video on this going over why I think this fight is a necessity. So if you're interested in that, the link will also be in the description below. So what challenges will be presented to Zoro in this fight? There's lots of hype regarding Kin and his fire, and how Zoro's interest was piqued on Punk Hazard when he saw Kinemon's wave the sword. How Kinemon could not only cut fire, but generate fire as well. So I do believe that Zoro will have to cut through a fire-based combatant in this arc. Someone that will push Zoro far more than anyone else has in the New World so far. But this won't come without setbacks. I think we could possibly see Zoro lose the Nidai Kitetsu in this battle. In the East Blue, Mihawk broke Zoro's swords, and of course in Eni's lobby, Yubashiri was rusted like I just mentioned. So I think Kin the Wildfire, will burn Nidai Kitetsu, melting it. But then Zoro will eventually cut through his fire techniques in a similar fashion to what we saw Zoro do against Mr. One when he cut through steel. It's not crazy to suggest Zoro can finish this fight without the Nidai Kitetsu. In the fight against Mr. One, he cut steel with just a one sword style technique. So it's not a stretch to say he could cut Kin and potentially his fire while missing a sword. But I think in general, having this kind of setback for Zoro, having a setback where he loses a sword, is good for his character, as someone who has pretty much breezed through the post-time skip without any adversity. When he reflected back on his training with Mihawk after the fight against Pika, Mihawk talked about how nicks on a blade are a mark of shame, and that if he were coated in hockey, it would have prevented this. And of course, in that Pika battle, he came out nick-free. He completely obliterated Pika. But maybe Kin will serve as a sort of a setback for Zoro. Maybe he'll be that wake-up call on just how strong swordsmen can be. His fire techniques, perhaps in conjunction with great armament hockey and swordsmanship that I assume Kin has, might be too much for Zoro's weakest sword to handle, which I assume afterwards he'll eventually overcome. We all know that Zoro won't ever straight up lose to another swordsman again on his path to becoming the world's greatest. But that doesn't mean setbacks can't happen. Setbacks that will result in him learning from this and eventually growing stronger. So the way I see it is that Zoro will indirectly win the right to wield Nidai Kitetsu from this battle, which is a little bit different than how he directly won Shusui from Ryuma. He will prove to be the strongest swordsman on Wano, and maybe even earn the respect of all the scabbards as well. This of course will mean he's one sword short, and will somehow result in Hitetsu giving him the Nidai Kitetsu. And I know it's kind of weird to imagine right now, since Hitetsu isn't in the vicinity of Onigashima, but I think Oda can make it work somehow, especially if the final battle moves to the Flower Capital, which symbolically makes a lot of sense to be the place of Kaido's downfall, being defeated by our main protagonist in front of all the citizens who have been terrorized by him for so many years. I've also heard some people suggest the idea of Zoro being gifted the sword Nidai Kitetsu after the arc is finished, but to me that feels a little bit wasted. A sword that's been teased since the beginning of the arc, and we wouldn't even be able to see him use the sword in action for the final battle? I wouldn't really like that. There's also a lot of people who question Zoro being able to participate in the final battle because Kin is such a powerful adversary that he'll be too wounded. But the narrative to me is too strong to suggest that Zoro won't be a major participant in the Kaido fight, with all the buildup and foreshadowing that supports this. I understand being skeptical on Zoro being the one who deals the final blow on Kaido, but there is way too much evidence to suggest that supports he'll at least be a major player in the Kaido fight. I'm not going to elaborate much more on that since it would require, again, another whole separate video. That's a major topic. But practically speaking, there are ways around the idea that he can't participate after an intense one-on-one fight. We have multiple skilled doctors in this battle, multiple skilled doctors on the Alliance side, such as Marco, who are more than capable of high-level healing. I also think people like Law and Kid will fight off against commanders before the Kaido fight as well. And I think Luffy is even going to fight against both Yonko. I don't think it's a stretch at all to say Oda will give his major players multiple big fights. So in conclusion, my prediction results from the events transpiring in a similar way to which he got Shusui in the pre-time skip, somewhat paralleling the events of the end of Eni's lobby up until the final battle in Thriller Bark. My prediction is that Zoro will lose his sword in a unique way. He'll then fight the strongest swordsman in the arc, in which he'll finish him off using two-sword style. This battle will then earn him the right to obtain a stronger sword, and that he has to get used to this on the fly, and eventually leading him to the final battle in which he'll be a major participant. So that's going to do it for me, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you're new to the channel, I'd appreciate you subscribing, liking, and sharing this video for others. Also, let me know in the comments if you agree with me on the way I think Zoro will obtain the Nidai Kitetsu, or if you think he's even going to obtain the sword at all. Let me know if you guys have any other alternatives. I'm more than willing to listen. Also, make sure you guys stay tuned on my channel for the Romance Dawn podcast episode 8. It's going to premiere Monday. We did not have an episode last week due to me and Fiji both being busy, but since One Piece is on break, we're going to use this episode to give our full thoughts on chapter 987, and per usual, just talk about One Piece in general. Once again, I appreciate all of you. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'm Jagan, and I'll see you guys next time.